Well, I think it's important, if you're listening to this right now, to not just look at the incident as an isolated event. It was definitely a historic massacre that I think belongs in history books alongside the Sharpsville massacre in South Africa, the massacre of Turkish and international activists on the Mavi Marmara Free Gaza Flotilla in 2010, and many other massacres, maybe even the Sabra and Shatila massacre in 1982. But we have to understand why the protest was taking place and why Israel responded so harshly. And to do so, we have to understand what the Gaza Strip is. And it really does go back to the Nakba, as you mentioned, Robbie. It goes back to 1948, 1947 and 48, when over 400 Palestinian villages were destroyed systematically by Zionist militias and then the Israeli army. 750,000 people or so were driven from their land and homes, turned into refugees in order to found the Jewish state of Israel, an exclusively Jewish state whose existence as such is predicated on the maintenance of a Jewish majority. That means, in historic Palestine, where most people are Arab and non-Jewish, you have to keep them out. And so one of the most convenient places to warehouse people was the Gaza Strip. Over 300,000 people went south towards Gaza in 1948. It was then controlled by Egypt. And in the early 50s, they began to mobilize as Fedayeen, or resistance fighters, under the watch of Gamal Abdel Nasser. And Israel instituted a policy under Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion of shooting them, anyone who crosses that Gaza border, which was then just kind of covered with a little bit of barbed wire, to keep them out. Israel also passed laws like the Prevention of Infiltration Act. I think it was passed in 1953, and it defined all Palestinians who had been turned to refugees as infiltrators, which meant that if they were caught inside what was then Israel, they would be arrested, usually brutally arrested by border police, and then they'd be taken on trucks and dumped in Gaza. In other cases, outside of the town of Ashkelon, what's now Ashkelon, which is in southern Israel, it's really close to Gaza. Sometimes it gets hit by rockets from Gaza. At the time, it was known as Askalun in Arabic, and its population was put in a concentration camp after 1948 and was held in barbed wire. An Iraqi Jew who was put in the town to replace the Palestinian population, Naim Giladi, wrote a book called Ben-Gurion's Crimes, and he talked about sneaking through the barbed wire into the concentration camp to speak Arabic with the Palestinians. And that's when he developed this deep, abiding hatred for Zionism, when he realized what was going on. And then he watched them loaded into trucks, and they were taken into Gaza and dumped there. And so the population, Dan and I have met the grandchildren of those people in Gaza who say, oh, look at those lights up there, up to the north in Eshkol, that's where my family's from. So the Gaza Strip is a warehouse, and people are being warehoused there to maintain Israel's ethnic purity. And of course, we know that they're being treated horribly. Now they're getting something like 4 to 6 hours of electricity a day. The economy is in shambles because of the siege. So much of the population is food insecure. They can't buy the food that might be available. Israel controls the skies. They control everything outside the sea. They shoot fishing boats that go too far offshore, and they maintain a concrete wall around the Gaza Strip. Some people would have called the Gaza Strip a concentration camp. Calling it an open-air prison is pretty fair. So 30,000 people, basically Gaza's civil society, the grassroots of Gaza, decided to march towards that concrete wall, march into the teeth of the Israeli army that maintains these what you could call ethnic borders, and to declare their right of return, which is guaranteed to them, by the way, by the UN's Resolution 194. So the march was really about resisting being warehoused forever. It was like a prison break. And the reason that Israel reacted so harshly is not only this perceived fear of security threats or terror, but a threat that's much greater to Israel, which is the demographic threat, that this population could come back and join up with other Palestinians and have families and outpopulate the Jewish population. So I think it's actually the massacre we witnessed has much darker undertones when you look at how the state of Israel is structured.